be filled unless the US actually steps up to the plate. But furthermore, the US also has incredible leverage with other donors who also aren't doing their part. And so if the US were to really take a leadership role, there's incredible opportunity to bring in other donors like Japan, Germany, and get them to really ramp up and scale up the resources they're providing, but within a framework that allows all of these sort of development actors to actually coordinate with one another. So that leads us to, the fact that there actually is a coordination mechanism that already exists. And it's called the Fast Track Initiative. And most of you are familiar with it, but I'll just quickly say it was established in 2002 to accelerate progress to the EFA goals. And what it essentially did was establish a partnership between governments and donor agencies to basically coordinate the delivery of aid around nationally owned education plans. So what this did was really provide a coordinating framework, and it basically was built on this idea of sort of a mutual commitment where at the country level, the government commits to providing domestic resources, to making education a priority, and to really producing a quality national education plan. But then the commitment on the side of the donors is that they will provide the resources, that external financing gap, so that the country can actually feasibly implement the plan that they've created. So the FTI has, since 2002, achieved an incredible amount. It has grown from a fairly small partnership that was really initiated around a set of pilot countries or pilot projects, and it has now grown to a huge international initiative that has endorsed 37 national education plans. And it actually has 17 donors who've all contributed up to now $1.3 billion, which is not an insignificant amount of funding. They've also operationalized this kind of harmonization of donors. And they've aligned them at the country level so that there's a country level process to support nationally owned education plans. So this model of country ownership is really a huge kind of contribution that the FTI has made in terms of like aid effectiveness and how to really put countries in the driver's seat and get local needs to be responded to. And the FTI has also driven a lot of policy dialogues around the kind of development issues around different things like how long the school year should be. And so they've really created a platform for this kind of systematic engagement of people in the partnership and different countries, agencies, technical experts to really start to stimulate some knowledge building and knowledge generation around education. So this has had a really positive impact, and it's fundamentally changed the way that donors work together. It is currently facing, and I think we have a couple different numbers based on different timelines, but $1.2 billion is needed just to support those who've been endorsed already. And that's just through the end of next year. So we're looking at a huge shortfall, and essentially the fund that the FTI has is really running dry. And if it's not replenished, then the FTI is facing a critical question about its ability to continue doing the work that it's doing. Because the funding it provides is one major incentive for implementing countries to actually submit their national education plan for endorsement. Without that incentive, it's up in the air about whether or not there will be such a drive to really expand how many countries are members. The FTI has also evolved immensely over the years, and it's only been around since 2002, but given the changing context, given how it had expanded very rapidly, the FTI's evolution has really put it in a place where now at this critical moment, it is poised to continue to improve upon what's there, and hopefully this replenishment will actually be successful. What the FTI has really been able to do in terms of changing context is it's got much more inclusive governance now, whereas initially there were heavily represented by donors at the level of governance. They've expanded seats for implementing countries and for civil society on the steering committee. They've also expanded the catalytic fund, which was originally a sort of last resort source of financing for countries that lacked adequate external financing, and now it's actually the first resort lending mechanism, and it's for all eligible low-income countries. So the pool of potential applicants is actually much bigger, and the catalytic fund is really now a much larger source of funding for those countries. The EPDF fund, which is really for the technical assistance and capacity development that the FTI supported, has basically typically just been available to the World Bank. And so those task team leaders were able to receive funding and then help really provide the kind of technical expertise that was needed. And there's discussion now that that EPDF fund will be made available to other kinds of players like civil society organizations, and to really develop capacity across the board and move beyond just a World Bank focused capacity development arena. And just last year, the FTI also has brought under its wing the Education Transition Fund, which was established by UNICEF to cover conflict-affected countries. Because if you have, want to give education aid to Southern Sudan, you're probably not going to want to channel that money through Khartoum. So the Education Transition Fund has actually allowed the FTI now to take under its wing a mechanism that's actually able to go to countries that have a weak infrastructure or fragile state, or they're conflict affected. And so the FTI's Catalytic Fund, which maybe wasn't able to cover those kinds of countries, is now being complemented by a more flexible financing source that might actually allow us to reach almost half of the kids who are out of school, because they're in countries that aren't covered by the Catalytic Fund and the way that it works in terms of aid modalities. Now, we have both this FTI evolution and the evaluation that has just been commissioned, and it will be done by the end of the year. But the independent evaluation of the FTI is something that's very much on the US radar. And I think when we talk about a global fund, we can't talk about it without talking about what currently exists. And we also, I think it's a little bit misleading to call it just a fund, because there is actually a whole coordination element to this that's absolutely essential. And it's also not just one fund, but we have EPDF, Catalytic Fund, we have all the bilateral aid flows that are sometimes coordinated, sometimes not. And then we also have the need for greater kind of monitoring and coordination and data, and so this mechanism would be not just one fund, but an ability to coordinate all aid flows so that they're implemented more effectively. But the real issue is that they're implemented more effectively so that at the country level, they can support country-owned strategies that have the input and buy-in of people on the ground, including civil society. So the question is really like, what are the next steps? Like, where do we go from here? Where do we take our policy dialogues so that we can start to explore this idea in a way that actually capitalizes on the opportunity to make it as effective as possible? So we can get $2 billion for a global fund, but if we don't make that funding more effective and implement it more effectively, we're not going to see results. And that's ultimately what we need to do. So I'll just quickly go through the principles that as civil society in the US we developed in a way to sort of respond to this proposal by Obama to say, well, if you are going to really go through with this, don't just put it all into USAID's bilateral, which really could be improved. Let's look at it as a way to invest in a multilateral engagement that would actually improve US bilateral, but also improve the global aid architecture. So really looking at it as an opportunity to improve aid effectiveness globally, and revitalize, while doing so, this global compact to really provide the resources needed. So one of the greatest strengths of the FTI is this national ownership that it's really developed around the country-owned plans. And the FTI has really been a model of that kind of aid effectiveness principle. However, it also, sorry,